Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, flat earthers, and people who think we didn't go to the moon, greetings and hello. It is I, your favorite slightly libertarian social studies teacher with just enough expertise to make things interesting, Mr. Palumbo, and this is the Professor Liberty Podcast. Thank you for joining us today. I'm genuinely honored that you've chosen to spend time with us today. The tens and tens of you faithful followers out there across the fruited plain, with just a few sprinkled around the world. Again, thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to email the show, the email is professorliberty1776@gmail.com. That's professorliberty1776@gmail.com. Send me your questions, your comments, your concerns, your quandaries, whatever. You just have to send it to professorliberty1776@gmail.com. Also, don't forget to go to Apple Podcasts and leave me a written review. Share this podcast with your aunts, your uncles, your communist cousin, whoever you think would benefit from this podcast. I thank you for your support. So I know, folks, it's been a whole month. I totally took the month of April off, unintentionally, by the way. I am a working man and things get a little crazy around here, but I've got a lot of good material in the hopper. I'm working on it. I've been messing around with some social media reels and shorts, trying to see if that works. If you guys like that stuff, please go to Professor Liberty on Facebook and like the reels and like the comments. But today I've got a podcast for you. You know, we just finished the Enlightenment in world history. That's that period of time where we get ideas such as natural rights and free speech. And, you know, one of the things we do in class is we talk about each philosopher, their ideas, and where they come from. And it's kind of stark because at the end, you get to this guy called Adam Smith. And while Voltaire and Montesquieu and Rousseau, they're all from France. And then all of a sudden you get to this guy from Scotland. So I said, hey, why don't we do a podcast on Adam Smith? Today's podcast is called Who is Adam Smith? Now, let's first start with what is the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was an intellectual and cultural movement in the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe that emphasized reason, science, individual rights, and skepticism towards traditional authority. These ideas are going to spark both the American and French revolutions, though those two revolutions went extremely different ways. The Enlightenment still affects us today. Perhaps we are still in the Enlightenment era. You know, I tell the kids we're still in the Industrial Revolution. Perhaps we are still in the Enlightenment era. Well, who was Adam Smith? Well, Adam Smith was born in a small town of Kirkcaldy, and it's right outside of Edinburgh. He was raised by his widowed mother after his father died shortly before he was born. He was a sickly child, but very curious. Adam Smith developed an early fascination with books, ideas, and public discourse. These traits would come to define his life's work. He lived during the Scottish Enlightenment, a period of rich intellectual activity. Now, Smith was a philosopher by training and inclination. And we'll get a little bit to that later, but economics is so sophisticated now. But before economics became as complex as it is today, it was really a philosophy. And though we think of Adam Smith as the father of modern economics, we have to remember that he was more interested in moral theory than just trade and prosperity. At the age of 14, Smith entered the University of Glasgow, where he studied philosophy. Later, he would win a scholarship to Oxford, but he actually saw that experience as a bit underwhelming. He found the intellectual climate stagnant and uninspiring. Still, he used his time wisely, and he read a lot. Greek philosophy, modern science, political theory. These all helped him build a foundation for his later works. After Oxford, Smith returned to Scotland and began a career as a lecturer and professor at the University of Glasgow. There, he taught courses on rhetoric, jurisprudence, and moral philosophy, and he gained a reputation as a gifted teacher and thinker. In 1759, he published The Theory of Moral Sentiments, his first major work, which explored the nature of human empathy, moral judgment, and social harmony. But the turning point came in the 1760s, when Smith accepted an offer to serve as a tutor for the young Duke of Buccleuch. This prestigious position took him on a tour across France and Switzerland, where he met some of the leading intellectuals of the Enlightenment, people like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Francois Quesnay, the founder of the physiocrats. These physiocrats were the early economic thinkers who believed that land was the source of all wealth. After returning to Scotland in 1766, he withdrew to his mother's home in Kirkcaldy and worked in solitude for nearly 10 years, developing his magnum opus. He wrote and rewrote, refined his arguments, and constructed a systematic theory of political economy that would change the world. What was this work called? The Wealth of Nations. The Wealth of Nations was about how societies can generate prosperity. Smith argued that all nations become wealthy not through hoarding gold and silver or colonizing other lands. That was the mercantilism thought of the day, but through productive labor, the kind that creates value and meets people's needs. In this work, he made several groundbreaking points, and let's go through some of them. First, he discussed the division of labor. Smith famously used the example at a pin factory. A single worker might make 20 pins a day on their own, but if 10 workers each specialized in a part of the process, together they could make thousands of pins daily. Specialization increases productivity, and productivity increases wealth. He also talked about free markets. Smith argued that when individuals pursue their own self-interests, they unintentionally contribute to the economic well-being of society. We'll get into more of that here in a second. He also came up with laissez-faire economics. Smith wasn't anti-government, but he was skeptical of overregulation. He believed that government's role should be limited to protecting property rights, enforcing contracts, and providing public goods like roads and defense. Laissez-faire is French for leave it alone or let it be. Adam Smith also proposed a labor theory of value, suggesting that value of a good is related to the amount of labor required to produce it. Now, this is something Karl Marx is going to build upon, but we know that the value of something really comes down to supply and demand. In economics class with the seniors, we talk about the two main drivers of value. One is utility. How much usefulness or satisfaction does the person derive from the good or service? And the scarcity, which is pretty much how much of it is available. Now, something also that comes from Adam Smith is the concept of the invisible hand, and it only appears a couple times in his writing, but it's had an amazing oversized impact. The idea is this: in a free market, individuals seek their own gain, often benefiting society as a whole. I love asking this question every year to the economics kids. I say something like, can someone pursuing their own self-interests, if everyone pursued their own self-interests, would society benefit? And they all look at me, deer in the headlights, and almost all of them say no, because they think self-interest means selfishness. So they think, well, if someone only acts for their own purposes and reasons, other people are going to be left behind. Now, that is the Marxist zero-sum game fallacy. We're not going to get into that today. But, I often tell a story, and maybe I should modernize it because I always use the butcher. I say someone wants to become a butcher, and they want to do what? And I wait for the kids, and I say they want to make money. Well, how do you make money as a butcher? Well, you want to provide the best quality cuts of meats at the lowest possible price. And you want to build a customer base, people coming back and coming back. Now, that butcher is working in his own best interest because he's trying to make a living. But in doing so, he's also attracting more and more customers. And if he offers them high quality at a low price, they are benefiting as well. Today, the invisible hand is often invoked to justify free market capitalism, and sometimes it's overtly simplistic. Adam Smith didn't believe that markets were perfect. He warned about monopolies, collusion among businessmen, and the exploitation of the worker. He wasn't naive, and neither shall we be, but he was a revolutionary in thinking that self-interests, properly channeled, could serve the common good. The Wealth of Nations was published in 1776. Does that sound familiar to anyone who likes to follow this podcast? That's the same year as the Declaration of Independence. And that's no coincidence. Both the American Revolution and Smith's economic ideas are rooted in Enlightenment ideas, an age that prized liberty, reason, and skepticism of absolute authority. Smith's attack on mercantilism, where the government controls trade and colonizes other areas for natural resource extraction, resonated deeply with the American colonists. Britain's restrictive trade policies and taxes and monopolies were seen as injustices, and Smith gave intellectual ammunition for the people that criticized them. Smith's belief in free trade, limited government, and productive labor aligned closely with the ideas of the American thinkers. Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and even Alexander Hamilton were aware of Smith's principles. Now, Hamilton would later go on and, kind of move away from some of Smith's ideas by advocating for more federal involvement in industry. But the underlying assumption that national prosperity depended on effective markets and individual enterprise was all from Adam Smith. So let's zoom out a little bit for a moment, and let's talk about why does Adam Smith matter so much? Well, because he helped found economics as a discipline. You see, before Smith, there was no clear framework or understanding of markets. He gave us tools, models, and language to describe economic activity. He shifted the conversation from how kings get rich to how nations become prosperous. Smith laid the groundwork for what we now call capitalism, an economic system based on private ownership, voluntary exchange, and the pursuit of profit. Now, Adam Smith didn't invent capitalism. It's kind of like Isaac Newton discovering gravity. It was already there. He just put a name to it, and it's kind of the same in this case. Smith provided the first coherent explanation of how it works. And in doing so, he profoundly influenced thinkers like David Ricardo or John Stuart Mill, or even later economists like my man Milton Friedman or Friedrich Hayek. But here's the catch. Over the centuries, Adam Smith's ideas have been both celebrated and distorted. For example, in the 20th century, especially during the Cold War, he was often portrayed as a cheerleader for deregulation of all kinds and absolute free market capitalism, no matter the cost. And as we said earlier, and we'll kind of mention here at the end, Smith was definitely more nuanced in his ideas and his beliefs. Remember, he's a moral philosopher first and an economic thinker second. So how do Adam Smith's ideas relate to the world we live in today? The global economy still runs largely on Smith's principles. But in today's complex world, Smith's ideas are being tested and stretched in ways he could not have foreseen. Here's some ideas and some examples. First, the gig economy. Well, what's the gig economy? The gig economy is a labor market characterized by short-term contracts or freelance work as opposed to permanent jobs. So think about working for Amazon, dropping off packages. Think of Uber drivers. Think of Grubhub. These are examples of a gig economy. Platforms like Uber or DoorDash epitomize the flexibility and freedom that Smith praised. Yet they also raise deep ethical and social questions. Are these workers genuinely free, or are they trapped in a precarious condition without benefits, job security, bargaining power? Smith would have warned against exploitation by the powerful and might have questioned whether the current system respects the dignity of labor. The next one is wealth inequality. Now, you guys know me. This whole myth of wealth inequality as something that has been something new or something growing or something that hasn't, there has always been wealth inequality. Okay, there's my soapbox disclaimer moment. There has never been a time where there has never been wealth inequality. However, having said that, would Smith have been comfortable with the billionaires amassing more personal wealth? Probably not. He accepted inequality as a natural outcome of productive people and enterprise. In a free society where you get to do what you can, there are different outcomes, right? Some people are more driven than others, and Smith would have realized this and accepted this. But we have to remember that he, at heart, was a humanist. Remember his theory of moral sentiments. That book would have suggested that he might have been deeply concerned with whether such inequalities undermine social trust, justice, and cohesion. What about monopolies and tech giants that we have today? This probably would have directly challenged Smith's belief in competitive markets. Smith feared concentration of economic power and believed that monopolies distorted markets and harmed customers. In today's digital age, when a handful of corporations control vast swaths of information, commerce, and personal data, Smith's invisible hand starts to look more like a closed fist. What about globalization? Another modern development. Adam Smith saw trade as a moral and practical way for nations to cooperate and prosper. There's that old saying, trading nations are not warring nations. But in a world plagued with fragile supply chains, trade wars, and resurging nationalism, many are questioning whether open markets alone can ensure resilience and fairness. So this is a great segue, and I know you guys are waiting for it. Mr. Palumbo, what about tariffs, Mr. Palumbo? Would Adam Smith think tariffs were a good thing, like your friend Trump? It's been a while since Annoying Student showed up, so I had to throw him out there. Just bear with me. Smith was broadly opposed to tariffs because he believed they interfered with the national flow of trade. In his book, Wealth of Nations, he says, quote, "The real cost of the protection of domestic industry by the prohibiting duties of the government consists in the price of goods being raised to a higher level than otherwise would be," unquote. So what is he saying there? Something that we all know: tariffs raise prices. But again, he was a nuanced man. Smith generally advocated for free trade, but he did recognize some exceptions, particularly when it came to issues of national security or retaliatory measures aimed at encouraging better trade practices. On national defense, he wrote, quote, "In a time of war, when the danger of invasion is imminent, the government may, and in many cases ought, to lay restrictions upon the importation of goods," unquote. This supports the idea that Smith allowed for strategic exceptions, such as protecting industries crucial to national defense. So think like shipbuilding, the steel industry, things that the military would need to wage war. While Smith's opposition to tariffs stems from his belief in the natural flow of trade and market efficiency, his economic philosophy was not one of rigid dogmatism. Rather, Smith's views reflect a deep commitment to the broader principles of liberty, moral sentiment, and human flourishing. Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations is often interpreted as a blueprint for laissez-faire economics, advocating for minimal government interference in markets. However, when we dig a little deeper into his work, or his other work, rather, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, we see a thinker who was deeply concerned with human empathy and the moral well-being of individuals. This is not a perspective we always associate with economic orthodoxy established in his name. Moreover, while his modern followers may sometimes interpret his economic theories in a dogmatic manner, Smith himself was a philosopher at heart, and he believed human behavior could not be entirely governed by economic laws alone. His moral philosophy, with its focus on sympathy, justice, virtue, placed significant emphasis on the well-being of individuals. It suggests that economic systems should serve the broader moral goals of society rather than maximizing wealth for one's own sake. Well, there you have it, folks. From his humble beginnings in Scotland to the groundbreaking ideas that helped shape modern capitalism, Adam Smith's influence is still felt today, sometimes in ways we may not even realize. His vision for a prosperous society built on free markets, productive labor, and limited government compose most of what we all know about modern economics today. Here at Professor Liberty, we seek to educate, inspire, and restore. If you like this podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts and give me a 5-star rating. You can move the algorithm even further if you give me a written review. You can also go to teacherspayteachers.com and get activities and worksheets and assignments for your classroom or your homeschool needs. Also, check us out on X. Check us out on Facebook. Become part of the Professor Liberty crowd. Until next time, go throughout the land and proclaim liberty.